Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us. Welcome to the July Tell Talk on the power of interactions, social distancing in early childhood with Quality Improvement Manager Katie Hoffman and a special introduction from Ann Dillard, President of KIP Consulting Services. Tell Talks are topics for early learning leaders that are monthly webinars for early childhood program leaders to facilitate solutions-focused discussions for your questions about the early childhood field in Minnesota. These one-hour webinars do not meet the standards for a formal professional development event, and participants will not receive a certificate of completion. Tell Talks are designed as a community building opportunity for leaders to engage and share ideas surrounding a specific content area. The Tell Talks team consists of Nikki Lepowski and myself. Nikki is the Quality Improvement Coordinator at Child Care Aware of Minnesota. I am the Workforce Advising Coordinator. We work with Corey Woosley and Katie Hoffman at Child Care Aware to coordinate Tell Talks. Some of our previous topics include early childhood leaders. How are you coping? How can we help? Mental health for families and employees, and resource roundup, libraries in your early childhood program. If you are interested in listening to any of the recording of these webinars, please send us an email. Coming up in August, we will hear from Jessica Beyer and Terry Steckelberg on First Children's Finance and the services they offer to early childhood programs. Child Care Aware of Minnesota is a resource and referral network for early childhood education in the state. We assist families in finding a quality child care program. CCA supports the professional growth of early childhood educators with professional development opportunities, the Eager to Learn online training platform, grants, parent-aware scholarships, and trainer and RBPD support. We keep the community informed on the importance of quality childcare. Child Care Information Services is a department within CCA that specializes in statewide information sharing and assisting families looking for care. How does CCIS interact with child care programs? CCIS sends a welcome packet with a new provider form to new programs. By completing the form, CCIS will have more information about your program to include on the Parent Aware website. This will assist families looking for childcare. Every 3 years, CCIS surveys programs about their business policies and tuition rates. Rates are confidential unless you opt to include them on the Parent Aware website. CCIS can use rates to create county averages, which influence CCAP reimbursement rates. CCIS receives calls from program leaders with general business questions, parent-aware questions, or training questions. CCIS can route you to the appropriate person to contact. This month, we've added information from one of our partner agencies, Center for Inclusive Childcare. CICC has a team of coaches across the state who are poised and ready to support the changing needs of childcare providers. They offer both individual and small group coaching. Currently, all coaching is virtual, either through phone conversations or online through video meetings. In response to the pandemic, CICC has designed coaching focused on supporting programs as they navigate through challenges currently impacting care. Participants may choose the traditional option of 30 hours of coaching or a shorter option of 5 to 10 hours of coaching on COVID-related topics. CICC is developing a system of response to providers seeking specific COVID support related to a case of exposure to COVID at their site. This will be offered in 2 levels depending on the need of the child care setting, which can include implementing health and safety best practices, communicating with families and staff, supporting children through change, and addressing loss. The Tell Talks team partners with several other organizations to offer coordinated resources surrounding early care and education needs. As always, participants here today are able to utilize the chat function in GoToWebinar to ask questions and share their thoughts throughout the presentation. So please feel free to share your questions on today's topic. We'll read these questions aloud during the broadcast. Again, we have two guest speakers today. First, the president of KIPP Consulting Services, Ann Dillard, will share an introduction to her keynote topic for the upcoming Trainer and RBPD Summit taking place virtually this fall. And after Ann, Katie Hoffman from Child Care Aware will discuss the topic of the power of interactions, social distancing, and early childhood. And with that, we're ready to turn over the broadcast to Ann. Thank you for joining us today, Ann.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here on this platform with you. And let me just share my screen. Okay, so Christy, would you please give me those directions again, the last thing you just read, just for my own clarity?
Oh, I just said that you would introduce your keynote topic for the Trainer and RBPD Summit.
Okay, excellent, excellent. And I am really excited about the keynote. I'm looking forward to it. And I'm just thrilled to always be in this platform, talking and working with my fellow Minnesotans. And what I want to do is just forward my slides just a little bit because I don't have it in the right direction. Okay. Okay, so coming up this fall, I am excited to share as keynote the work of Dr. Brene Brown, who many love and just follow her work. And I just love all the things that she's doing around vulnerability and around shame. And now she has a new program that's talking about daring to lead. And I know that the theme for this coming summit is daring to grow, and so we're going to be talking about growing and the principles, some principles in growing. But I want to start with this quote. It says, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly." And so we're going to be exploring those concepts of growth, key components of growth. We're going to talk about clarity of values. And we know that when our values are clear, it's easier to make the decisions that we need to do to make for our own growth. Vulnerability. What does that mean? How does it look as we grow? Trust. And we're going to explore empathy and self-compassion. Those are two things that's easy to give to other people and hard to give to ourselves. But nevertheless, they're very important components as we learn and grow. We're also going to talk about boundaries, because without healthy boundaries, that our growth can be stunted, our growth can be hindered. And so it's really important that we focus on how do we make and enforce our boundaries, right? And when we talk about boundaries, those have to do with really also thinking about what is in our control and what's not. Well, also, we're going to talk about some things that block our growth as we dare to grow. Shame shows up in a lot of places and hinders us, sends us into fear. So those two components are two very powerful things that block our growth. And so I am just really excited about this fall summit that's coming up, and excited to share these tools with you during the keynote address and also in the breakout session. Christy, are you still there?
Yes, I am. I'm so excited. I love Brene Brown. I've read all of her books, so we're really looking forward to that keynote. So we'll be sure to send out information about the Trainer Summit after today's Tell Talk. And I apologize for throwing you off, Anne. I realize this is slide 8 of 9. I'm so sorry. Go back.
That's okay. That's okay. And so now I'm going to share about the interaction and social distancing.
Thank you.
No problem. That's part of being in this field. You know, we have to be flexible in the things that we do, right? And so we just roll with the punches. So today I'm excited about the Tell Talk, the power of interactions, social distancing in early childhood. I'm so excited about this. And when I think about distancing, I think about the age that we're in right now with COVID-19 and all the complications and all the uncertainties that's going on. It's so imperative that we continue to operate as relational, as responsive, as we offer responsive childcare. And so, as a mental health professional, it was hard for me to think about doing this presentation without also tying in some of the psychological impact that is that this time, this COVID-19 pandemic time have on our not only on our families, but also on the children whom we serve and on the workers, our educators, our trainers, everyone is just impacted psychologically. So some of the psychological impacts that we are seeing, and you know, if we are intentional, we can be more cued in to looking for these things. Anxiety, there's an increase in anxiety in our children. There's increase in our anxiety in our staff and also in our educators. And so looking for anxiety, post-traumatic stress syndrome and symptoms and disorder, it's coming up because this is a very traumatic time for people. And as parents are traumatized by the different events that's happening, not just with COVID-19, but the racial unrest that's happening in our country and worldwide, we look at how these things affect the children in our care as well. Depression is another thing to look for. Increase in ADHD symptoms, sensory processing symptoms, and also increase in domestic violence that's happening in the home surroundings, and increase in abuse and neglect. And when those things are increased, then we see a lot of the children coming into care, they have increased ACEs. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the adverse childhood experiences that children have when they're in these adverse situations. And so it is so imperative that we keep an eye out and know that and remind ourselves that, you know what, we're seeing different behaviors. We're seeing these symptoms manifest in behaviors, but what are the behaviors really about? Is it that this child is just misbehaving, or are there other psychological things that's happening that we need to take a look at? And in these interactions, also making sure that the educator is also taking care of his or herself, themselves. It's important to look at what the educator is experiencing. Are they taking care of their psychological needs? Are those being addressed? What about your fears? Your fears of coming to work, your fears of interacting with children and their families and not knowing who else they might have interact with. So making sure that you are present as an educator by taking care of your own psychological needs, addressing your fears, and therapy is always something that I recommend, or having a strong support system and someone that you can talk to and interact with and address these fears again, so that you can be mindful, you can be present, and you can promote continued strong interactions with the children and their families and with your coworkers as well. And keeping clear routines, keeping them clear, uh, and predictable. Those are some of the things that lower the anxiety of the staff, of the team, and of the children in your care. If they are able to predict, again, the routines. And some of the routines, so many routines have been changed, right? During COVID-19, the regular schedules have been adjusted, so helping our children to understand and to learn the new routines, and being patient and flexible in that process is really important. Deep breathing and mindfulness, that's always a go-to, so that we can stay regulated in order to co-regulate with our children and help them manage and walk through behaviors that we might be seeing. And also what it does is it calms the nervous system, which address some of those psychological things or symptoms that I discussed earlier. If the nervous system is calm in both the educator and both the child, then you're able to navigate that space a little more effectively. And so when I am thinking about social distancing again in early childhood, I think about, just like I stated just a second ago, that everything is new, is unprecedented, and childcare providers and educators are asked to perform so many additional tasks and repetition to keep things sanitized, to keep people in their proper spaces without with minimizing cross contamination. And those are so many different and additional requirements. And I think about how are some of the ways that we can teach the children and keep them up to date and up to par in on what's going on. So the use of social stories is so important, videos and pictures to show them about hand washing. And I know that these are things that you do outside of a pandemic, and so even being more intentional now, showing them pictures and stories and video clips about social distancing and what that means is so important. And I know that there's a huge controversy about, should children be wearing masks and what does that look like? I have talked to a few people in childcare programs where the adults wear masks and they're not asking children to wear masks. Of course, children under 2 are not being asked to wear a mask, but it still present a challenge on how to get those children to keep their mask on, and how long do they keep them on, and so many things are still being sorted out. But and I'm going to share just a little bit on my next slide. But either way, this is so important, and it's important to have those structured routine and predictability. And in this, we also talk about how do we honor the need for physical touch in this time. and protect ourselves also. And that's kind of very challenging. And one of the things that I would say is maximize the time that you have, where you, for example, you have to do diaper changes and feeding and things like that, maximizing those times to give extra touches. Um, it was so funny because I recently came back from Africa, and it was right at the beginning of COVID-19. And what I noticed, in one of the villages where I was visiting, the way that the children were interacting, they had taught the children how to do the elbow bump or the ankle bump, so they were still getting some kind of interaction without, the hugs that they're used to. And so that was interesting to see how they had adapted. Knowing that physical touch is still really important, and we know that in many places we're limiting that. Progressive muscle relaxation is one of the tools that I am teaching educators how to incorporate in their programs. And again, so many of these things you already do, but how can we do it more intentionally? And when we talk about progressive muscle relaxation, it's the form of relaxing your muscles, by tensing them up, acting like you're squeezing a lemon, and you're squeezing those large muscles, you're squeezing your arms together, and then you're holding it for 4 and you're releasing. You're acting like you're chewing like a crunchy carrot, and you're chewing really hard to get those muscles, those jaw muscles and muscles in your face. And then you're doing that for the count of 4 and releasing. You're huddling, teaching the children, or you could do it, adults really benefit from this as well. Huddling like you're rolling yourself into a ball as tight as you can and holding yourself, and then releasing. So those are some of the ways that we can teach ourselves and the children in our care to get that extra touch and that extra physical input, and addressing the needs of our muscles to relax as well. And then there's the serve and return. And one of the things that I think about when I think about increasing this opportunity for serve and return, I think about, how do you do that if you're wearing a mask? At this On this slide, I really like these masks that they have the clear mouth area, and that way you can still promote that interaction for those children who need to see your mouth, and they need to make that connection and learn in that way. And so in promoting that serve and return, I think these masks, and I don't know all about them, but I think these are a really cool way to help bond and help promote those connections, because this is something that we're doing now. We don't know how long we have to do it, but I think to keep that continued brain development going in our children, I think these are really cool. So again, just a brief review. The social stories of showing kids how other kids are doing this, how it's happening in different places, so that they can become more familiar with it is so important. Helping the child to touch the mask, be familiar with it, make it fun, and incorporate positive reinforcements around it, incentivizing them wearing it for short periods of time, starting with 1 second, and then let's see who can wear it for a little longer, and extending the periods of times that they are asked to wear it. I think that could help bring about the behavior that we want. And of course, wearing it ourselves. So we are modeling the behavior, modeling how to put it on, modeling how to take it off, modeling just modeling the behaviors that we want to see. And I think as we do this, it's important to consider, the level of discomfort that some of our children might be feeling. So maybe not even the mask with the elastic around the ears, but do we need a mask with Velcro? Do we need a mask with special hooks? I've seen where in some child care centers, they're using, the monkeys from the Monkey in the Barrel. They're using the monkeys as a special hook in the back of the child's head to hold the mask on instead of putting it around their ears. And I think that's a pretty clever way to have an additional closure. And also paying attention to the size mask that we're buying and our parents are buying for the kids and the children in our care is really important so that they can be as comfortable and so it can be less suffocating. I found this one graphic and I thought it was really cool. And this is something that I can also send over so people can have. I think it explains how to help your child to adapt to wearing a mask. And I think it's really cool with these graphics, explain why we're doing it, talk about the safety, talk about the germs that we're trying to prevent getting and transmitting. Practice doing it, putting it on, taking it off, becoming familiar with the fabric, pretending. So this is really, really neat how you can pretend to be a doctor, pretend to be a veterinarian, pretend to be a nurse, and to get acclimated to the idea of wearing the mask. I love the idea of stuffed animals, trying it out on your dolls or your stuffed animals so that children can play with it and be familiar with it. And then take a picture, having friends or families. One of my family members reached out and asked us to send pictures of us wearing masks. So people who are familiar to their child, having them send pictures or do a collage of them wearing a mask so it doesn't seem so random or isolating that we're asking children to do something that they're totally unfamiliar with. And you wearing it yourself also is a good image for your children to see. Get creative. I love the DIY idea of making your own mask and decorating it and getting creative. A couple of my friends did that with their early childhood age children, and they become so familiar with it. And this idea of starting with familiar clothing, so something that they already use, maybe a small item, a small piece of clothing that's too small, and turning it into a mask and making it something comfortable for children to wear. I think these are all creative ways to help get them acclimated and just excited about doing something so different right now. So I also have this slide with some resources, and I'll send it over in case people want to get further information on any of the points that I've shared during this presentation. Okay, Christy.
All right, thank you so much, Anne. Those were some really creative and fun ideas on, how to get children involved in and maybe even excited to wear a mask in some cases, which is
right.
Okay, well, we will turn it over to Katie Hoffman now to continue the conversation on the power of interactions.
Katie, this is Nikki. I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter. Thank you so much, Anne, for that important information. Let's turn it over here.
Great. Let me get to the start. All right. Can you see my screen okay?
We sure can.
Great. Well, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Hoffman, and I just want to say thank you to Anne. Hopefully she's still on. What a wonderful way to start out this 1 hour together. I took about 2 pages of notes while she was talking, so I don't know what that says about what I have to present for you, but great ideas, great strategies, and just from a very kind of level-headed, realistic point of view. And I just really appreciate Anne and her time that she spent with us today. I also appreciate and just want to thank Nikki and Christy. It takes a lot of work to get these TEL Talks up and running, from arranging presenters to the details that go into it, the technology and the follow-up. I just want to give them a shout out because these would not happen if it were not for them. So with that, I'm just going to piggyback off of some of the things that Anne said, although like I said, she had some really good strategies and ideas, and I'm hoping in a few minutes we can start hearing from all of you about some of your questions, concerns, and your ideas that have been working for you. And I want us to just spend some time talking about what it means to maintain some of these interactions and how we're building relationships with young children these days. It is different, and we do need to make sure that we're maintaining those and supporting children where they're coming from. So this is me. I would probably prefer to have my webcam on because that picture is so outdated and doesn't look a thing like me anymore, I don't think, but that's what happens. So when we think about our work, and like I said, I'm just going to try to piggyback off of what Anne said. When we enter this field, we know that we are not widget makers in a factory. We know that we have tiny humans that rely on us for so many different things during the day. And we approach our work in a relationship-based way. And we know that we can't do our teaching work, if you will, or our growing and guiding work if we don't have a strong, solid foundation with these young children. And so we approach it in a way that we know we have to create warm and, serve and return opportunities and interactions to build these relationships. We know that it takes time and a lot of energy sometimes to build these relationships. That was probably the biggest learning curve for me as a teacher, and the biggest thing that I helped other teachers learn was how much energy it takes to build a solid relationship with a child in order to be able to get the work done that you want to do and to see them learn and grow. We do that by giving each individual child what he or she needs. We know that they are not all the same, and we know that the same approach does not work for every child. And so we, like Anne said, we have to be flexible. We have to modify and adapt and meet children where they're at. And in these times when things are so uncertain for our tiniest humans, we really have to be sensitive to where they're coming from and meet them where they're at. And then we find their strengths and their feelings, and we build off of those when we're interacting with them. And so those are different every day. They're different every hour, generally. And we have to just be adaptable and know all of that. And at the same time, understand our own feelings and strengths and what we need in the relationship with our peers, with our supervisors, with the families that we work with. And so all of those things come into play when we're talking about building relationships with young children. It goes a little something like this, and it looks a little something like this, or it did. We're on the children's level, we're hugging, they're sitting on our laps, we're encouraging them to hug each other, and we're building kind of these physical relationships where they rely on us and they trust us because we have shown them affection, we have shown them we are a safe person, and we've built that solid foundation. And then along comes COVID. And everything changes, and we have to change. We have to change our approach. We have to change our mindset. Our own mindset goes into a space of how do I keep myself safe as an early childhood educator? How do I keep the children and families safe? And we have to balance our own self-care with the care that we have to give our youngest children. So then we have to approach things a little bit differently. And playtime and school structure time looks much different than it used to. It's hula hoops spaced out and a teacher with a mask. It's a teacher with a mask and a child with a mask putting on hand sanitizer. It's children lined up in rows of desks with spacing in between them. it's screenings at the front door and lined up, 6 feet apart to be safe. It's these kinds of things that we've now had to accept as part of our day and accept as part of our work. And yet all along the way, we have to also maintain the need and the desire for us to be able to have good, solid relationships with the children and provide for them that emotional support that they need. So how do we do that? How do we continue to create nurturing relationships in a time when physical touch isn't always a safe option? I heard Anne say, talking about maximizing those opportunities for physical touch. So during diaper changing time and during meal times, and I think it also has to be paired with a lot of verbal reassurance and verbal nurturing. In the past, we might not have taken the opportunity to provide a lot of kind of verbal hugs, if you will, when we're doing those kind of daily routine things. But now more than ever, if that's the time that you're doing your physical touch and your kind of warm embraces, you maximize that. And I really appreciate what Anne said there. But there's lots of other ways to do it, and we have to be able to be safe when we do that. So social distancing or physical distancing in early childhood, we have a lot of new rules and recommendations and things that we're all trying to adjust to. I know that you all are trying to stay up to date on the newest rules and the newest regulations, and some come from the national organizations like the Centers for Disease Control, and they talk more about making sure you're washing your hands and having a change of clothes and monitoring children's health and well-being. And in Minnesota, we have our own specific ones where you're creating licensing preparedness plans for COVID and making sure that you're abiding by some of the recommendations we have right here in Minnesota. I'm not going to go through those with you. I'm sure that you're well aware of them. If you're not, we'll definitely include the links for you. But in addition to those, you have your own rules within your programs or your homes that you have decided are important to you to keep your children safe, to keep yourself and your family safe. So how do we mix all of that together and continue to do the work of early childhood that we all entered into this field to do, knowing that building relationships and social interactions and physical interactions are part of that? So I want to just, take a moment to have you think about some of the things that you're wondering about, some of the things you're concerned about, and some ideas you have that have worked in your program that you can share with the rest of us. There's quite a few people on here today, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I don't really have anything new to share with you. I wanted to more be a facilitator of a conversation so that we can all hear from each other and maybe, one, feel reassured that we are all in this together and that there are no good solid answers to anything. And two, we all have good ideas and we all have good ways of finding solutions that could be meaningful to, you found meaning for them in your program or your home. And so share them. They might become meaningful for someone else. And that's kind of the general forum of this TEL Talk today, is to help us kind of generate those conversations and share some of those ideas. So I'm just going to pause for just a minute and just, ask Nikki if there's any questions that have come in or big concerns that maybe we can take just a moment to talk through.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, thanks for presenting that information. I think that, let's see, some of the questions are just maybe comments that came through. We're just, questioning if it's developmentally appropriate for, teachers to be wearing masks, probably alluding to, language development and things like that. It looks like Karen Bradley has a story that she can share about someone who's already using their new plan. Karen, that's awesome. I'll go ahead and take you off mute if you want to go ahead and share that. Let me see if I can find your name on here. And then again, if anyone has anything to share, they can type it in that questions box and let us know. Okay, Karen, you should be able to go ahead.
Yep, there we go. I think I'm unmuted. One of my providers just called me today and said she was just kind of steaming and needed to vent a little bit and process. But one of her clients came in and said, "Oh yeah, you know, last week we're having our bathroom remodeled, and one of the workers came up positive for COVID." And my provider, I'll just call her Linda, she said, "Holy cow, you know, so obviously the little girl is not coming. Have you gotten her tested yet?" And the mom said, "No, you know, she has her special needs that we know about, and we think that would be upsetting for her. So no, we're not planning to get her tested, and we haven't been tested either. And it's okay. Like my boss said, I could still come into work." And so, you know, Linda was quite taken aback, and she just thought, well, this is not okay. And she really was just struggling a little bit with, how do I handle this? And she realized she really has just developed the new plan that was required of providers to create their COVID plan. And so she's going to lean on that. But it just kind of struck her that not everyone takes as seriously the precautions and, you know, what the ramifications could be for sharing germs and things like that. So, you know, I mean, it's putsy as it is to follow all the rules and make new plans. There will come a time when we need to use them. So it really is smart to abide by the rules that, you know, DHS and everybody's coming up with. So that's about it. A little tiny kind of off topic, but not really, but kind of.
No, that's great, Karen. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a real life scenario, things that are happening in real time and things that we've never had to address before. You know, historically, you know, pre-COVID, we call it, usually some of our biggest struggles were, you know, illness exclusion policies and, you know, sending children home and getting, you know, people to abide by those kinds of policies. We're in a very different era, and this is uncharted territory. I'm sure you've heard that many times. And I want to acknowledge the struggle. I want to acknowledge that, like I said before, there are no standard answers for any particular scenario that you're going through. I think we are all figuring this out together. But one thing that Karen just said that I think is really important is, you know, as you're making these plans, or as you yourself are getting grounded in this brave new world of early childhood, there are some things that you might adopt for your own philosophy that are different than your teaching philosophy before, or your leadership philosophy from before. You know, if you feel strongly about certain things, I think it's perfectly acceptable, as we all start to develop our new practices, to stand by those and be confident in, you know, the practices that you're establishing, the changes that you're making, based on recommendations, based on your own needs for yourself and your staff and your children and families and your own families at home. I think that's something we've never really had to consider before. We all enter this field knowing that we're going to get sick, right? We have, you know, strep once a year for about 5 years, and then we don't get it anymore. But this is different, and this is a little more serious. And I think that is a struggle that I have heard people have encountered, you know, the differing levels of the seriousness that people see this as. And how do we navigate that conversation when, you know, someone doesn't really feel the need to, or thinks it might be too upsetting, or, you know, don't feel they were exposed for long enough to really worry about it. I think there are some policies and recommendations that we can lean on, so that you can enforce some of those safety precautions that you're being asked to. So thanks for sharing, Karen. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you being on today. Any others, Nikki? Otherwise, I think I have a couple more slides, but it's more just kind of spurring conversation.
There's nothing else at this time, Katie. I'll let you know if anything else comes up.
Perfect. Okay. So then what about the children? So here, this image of this little girl in a mask, but, you know, needing a big hug. And how do we do that? How do we, you know, interact with all of the children? And so this speaks to some of the things that Anne was talking about, and, you know, a comment that Nikki just shared, somebody had about, you know, is it developmentally appropriate for a teacher to wear a mask and hide the mouth and the lips that she's using to talk with young children so that they can learn their language and literacy skills? I think of this particularly in our infant rooms, where these young babies are needing that visual feedback in order to form the the forms with their own mouth, and how are we doing that if a teacher has a mask across their face? Anne shared some really great resources, and I love those ones with the clear panel that young children can see, but also just thinking about how to incorporate that into your daily routine. And so Anne also talked a little bit about that, which is great. Make it, model the behavior you want to see, but also understand that some children are going to take longer. Remember I said earlier how much energy it takes to build relationships. And many of you, I'm guessing, are finding that you are starting over. You're starting over with preschoolers that you've had for 3 years that are now, living in a trauma and needing to start over in their relationship with you. So how do we do that in an era where we have face coverings and, full on, PPE sometimes, and, parents dropping off at the door and not being as involved in the physical aspect of the environment anymore? And, what kinds of changes are those? So how are we meeting children where they're at? And what kinds of things are we doing in our programs? I fully agree with Anne when she says about maintaining really predictable routines. One thing I would add to that is to look at your routines and look at your schedules. And this applies to any classroom, any environment, center-based or family. I always looked at my environment when I felt like things were a little bit more stressful, and whether something specifically traumatic had happened or a brand new group of children had started, I looked at my daily routine and I looked at my plans for the day, and I thought, where can I allow some accommodations, and where can I have some wiggle room where kids feel a little bit more empowered and in control? And in a time when things are so different and have changed so much for them, are there times of the day where we can loosen the rules, keep the routine, but loosen the rules and the parameters around those routines? So I'll give you an example. I supervised a toddler room at one time, and they were just really struggling to get through their, early mornings, and they were, so hyper focused on the lesson plan for the day and making sure that all the activities were done. And they had scripted it, basically to the 15-minute segment. So from 9:30 to 9:45, that's when we all sit at the table and we do art. And from 9:45 to 10, that's when we go sit on the rug and we have group time. And I talked to them a little bit about, what if you kind of took those rules off and just made it an open, like still have a routine, but open those activity times up a little bit, where you're going to offer art and you're going to sit on the rug and read a story. Not everybody has to come to either. And give the children a little more power, a little more control over an environment that right now they don't have a lot of control over. So it's a tricky balance, but I think it is important to maybe look at the way you're structuring your environment and your days, so that kids feel like, if we're asking them to adopt all of these new practices, that they have some control over parts of their day too. So, and I'm not advocating that everybody abandon all curriculum that they do. I still advocate that structured activity and schedules and routines are important. What I would advise is, and just give a little bit of guidance from my old life as direct care, is, take a look at what you're asking of children in this time, and could you spend less time managing the schedule and more time, sitting physically distanced, but at least sitting and being available to help build those relationships. If you can't, do all of that kind of hugging and hand holding and all of that, can you at least be, kind of physically available and not so worried about the day-to-day activities and making sure that everything is done on time and all of that. So that's just one idea. Again, it comes from, my practices in my old life, but it was definitely something that I encourage, just both for the teacher's sanity and for the children. So I think that's all I had, other than this final quote from Princess Diana that hugs can do a great amount of good, especially for children. So when Anne talks about maximizing that physical touch time, to make sure that you're doing that, in those times when children do need a hug and they fall down and they scrape a knee, and you absolutely have to pick them up and help them and hug them and reassure them and comfort them. Take your precautions and do what you need to do, but don't shy away from hugging, because that is like the primary foundation and way to make a child feel safe when they trust you. So with that, I'm going to pause for a minute and see if there are other comments or questions or ideas that people have, reactions to anything I've said here.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Let's see here. So there's a couple comments just asking about face shields and wondering if they provide enough protection so that, children can still see their faces. So curious about that. Some comments just about, being flexible and adaptable and giving children some of the power and control. There's so much going on. I've heard from a lot of providers, like you just said, to slow down and just take the time to really evaluate where the educator is feeling so that you can best support your kids too. So I don't know if anyone on the line has any other comments, questions. There's a hand raised, and I want to make sure I'm seeing that. Chris Gable, if you have a question, I can go ahead and take you off mute. Okay, I have you off mute, Chris. If you want to go ahead and ask your question or give your comment, just have to unmute yourself.
I'm not quite sure why my hand is up. I haven't touched my computer, or I don't have a question.
Okay, that's no problem. I just wanted to hear.
But thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Right, remember, if anyone has any other suggestions, questions, things that have worked for them, go ahead and type that in the questions box, and I'll make sure to get to those. Or you can go ahead and raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Okay, Katie, I'm not seeing anything else. If there are any other questions, we'll make sure we follow up after today's webinar as well. And of course, this is going to be recorded, so we'll make sure to share this with everyone who's registered, as well as any resources from Anne or Katie. And then if there are any other questions or feedback about TELTalks, feel free to email Christy or myself. Christy, did you have anything else to say before we head out?
Yeah, thanks for checking, Nikki. I did want to just add a thought. I think it's so important that we all recognize the many factors that are, seeming to affect our levels of abilities right now to care for ourselves and others. And I have a hope for everyone who's listening here today that you're all able to take at least a moment of every day and to think of all the things that you are accomplishing and the efforts that you are making, and just to allow yourself grace to be human. I know that there's kind of a wish to be a superhero every day, and you all are in my eyes and in the eyes of children and their families. So thank you for what you do, and thanks to Anne and Katie for speaking today on these topics. We really appreciate your expertise, ideas, and insight, and thank you to all the participants for being here.
Great, thanks everybody. Have a good afternoon.